They say the grass is always greener on the other side. I believed that once. Believed it so deeply that I left the man I loved for a life I thought would make me whole. But now, years later, I find myself standing at the edge of everything I wanted, staring back at what I left behind. His name was Liam. We met when I was 25, both of us fresh out of grad school and brimming with plans for the future. Liam wasn't the kind of guy who stood out in a crowd, no flashy confidence or quick-witted charm. But he had this quiet steadiness, a way of making you feel like the world was a little less chaotic when he was around. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my best friend, my confidant, my home. For 4 years, we built a life together. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was ours. We had a tiny apartment with mismatched furniture, a cat named Oliver, and a list of dreams we were slowly ticking off, one by one. But somewhere along the way, the life we were building started to feel small. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, a nagging thought I couldn't shake. Was this it? Was this all there was? I'd scroll through social media, watching friends jet off to exotic destinations, land promotions at prestigious companies, and live lives that seemed so much bigger than mine. Meanwhile, Liam and I spent most of our weekends on the couch, binge-watching Netflix and ordering takeout. I tried to push the thoughts away, to remind myself of all the good things we had. But the more I tried to ignore them, the louder they became. And then I met Alex. Alex was everything Liam wasn't. Charismatic, ambitious, larger than life. We met at a networking event for my job, a night I almost skipped because Liam had wanted to stay in and watch a movie. Alex had this energy about him, a magnetism that drew people in. And when he turned that energy on me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. It started innocently enough. We exchanged numbers under the guise of professional networking, meeting up for coffee to discuss work projects. But those meetings quickly became something more. Alex talked about things Liam and I never did: travel, ambition, the desire to leave a mark on the world. Being around him made me feel alive, like I was part of something bigger. It wasn't long before I started pulling away from Liam. I'd cancel plans, stay late at work, and avoid the conversations that I knew were coming. He noticed, of course. Liam wasn't the type to ignore the elephant in the room. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked one evening, his eyes searching mine. "Nothing," I said too quickly, avoiding his gaze. "You've been distant," he pressed. Distracted. "If something's wrong, you can tell me." "I'm just tired. Elite." He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. That was Liam, always giving me space, always trusting me to come to him when I was ready. But I didn't. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night. Liam and I were sitting on the couch, Oliver curled up between us, when I blurted it out. "I think we need to talk." Liam turned to me, his expression wary. "Okay." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I've been feeling restless, like I'm stuck in a rut. I think I need some time to figure things out." Liam's face fell, and the look in his eyes nearly broke me. "Figure things out?" he repeated. "I'm not happy, Liam," I said, my voice shaking. "And I don't think it's fair to either of us if I stay when I feel this way." He was quiet for a long time, staring down at his hands. "Is there someone else?" he asked finally. I hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer he needed. "I see," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The weeks that followed were a blur. I moved out of our apartment, leaving behind the life we'd built together. Alex was there to catch me, his world full of excitement and possibility. For a while, it felt like I'd made the right choice. But as the months went by, the cracks began to show. Alex's energy, the thing that had drawn me to him, became exhausting. His ambition left little room for me, and our conversations felt more like monologues about his dreams than anything else. I realized that the life I thought I wanted, the big, glamorous life, wasn't what I'd imagined. And then there was Liam. I thought I could forget him, that time and distance would dull the ache. But he was everywhere. In the smell of coffee in the morning, in the sound of rain on the windows, in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. I started wondering about him constantly. Was he okay? Had he moved on? Did he hate me for what I'd done? The worst part was knowing I couldn't reach out. I'd made my choice, and I had to live with it. One night, nearly a year after I left, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling at the camera, arms wrapped around each other in front of the tiny Christmas tree we'd bought for our apartment. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred with tears. I'd left Liam for a life I thought would make me happy, but all I'd found was an emptiness I couldn't fill. I'd always heard people say that time heals all wounds, but a year after I left Liam, the wound felt as fresh as the day I walked out the door. Alex and I had ended things a few months earlier. It wasn't a dramatic breakup, no shouting matches or slammed doors. It was quieter than that, more like a balloon slowly deflating. One night, over dinner, Alex had looked at me and said, "I think we want different things." And he was right. I'd thought I wanted the same things as Alex, a big life, a whirlwind of ambition and adventure. But the truth was, I didn't even recognize myself in that world. I moved into a small apartment after the breakup. It was nothing like the place Liam and I had shared. The walls were stark white, the furniture sparse and cold. It felt like a blank slate, and maybe that's what I thought I needed. But every night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind wandered back to Liam. The first time I saw him again was by accident. I was at the grocery store, wandering aimlessly through the aisles, when I turned a corner and there he was. He hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment, I just stood there, frozen. He looked different. He'd grown a beard, something he'd always talked about but never followed through with. He was dressed casually, a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and a pair of worn jeans. And he was smiling, laughing, actually, at something the woman beside him had said. My heart twisted painfully at the sight of him with someone else. She was pretty, with long dark hair and a warm, easy smile. I told myself I should be happy for him, that he deserved to find someone who could love him the way I hadn't. But all I felt was an ache so deep it nearly took my breath away. Before he could spot me, I turned and walked out of the store, leaving my half-full cart behind. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Who was the woman? How long had they been together? Did she know how he liked his coffee, or how he always hummed under his breath when he was concentrating? Did she know the way his nose crinkled when he laughed, or how he always insisted on holding the umbrella even when he was getting soaked? I told myself it didn't matter. Liam wasn't mine anymore. I'd made sure of that. But the questions wouldn't stop. A week later, I finally broke down and called Claire, my best friend. She'd been there through it all, the breakup with Liam, my whirlwind relationship with Alex, and everything that came after. "You saw him?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "He looked happy," I said, my voice breaking. "Anna, it's been a year," Claire said gently. "You left because you thought it was the right thing to do. But maybe it's time to figure out what you really want." "I don't know what I want," I admitted, tears streaming down my face. "I thought I did, but I don't. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about him." "Then maybe you need to talk to him," Claire suggested. "No," I said quickly. "I can't do that to him. He's moved on. I saw him with someone else." "And you think that means he's forgotten about you?" Claire asked. "Anna, you were with him for 4 years. You don't just forget something like that." I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew she was right. But the thought of reaching out to Liam, of facing him after everything I'd done, terrified me. For the next few weeks, I tried to focus on anything but Liam. I threw myself into work, took up running, and even started a pottery class. But no matter what I did, he was always there, a constant presence in the back of my mind. One night, after a particularly restless evening, I found myself scrolling through my phone again. My thumb hovered over his contact, the familiar name staring back at me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped the screen and typed out a message. Liam. I know this is out of the blue, but I was wondering if we could talk. I stared at the words for what felt like an eternity, my finger hovering over the send button. Finally, I took a deep breath and pressed it. He replied the next morning. "Sure. When and where?" The simplicity of his response made my chest tighten. No anger, no hesitation, just Liam, steady as ever. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. When I walked into the cafe and saw him sitting there, my heart skipped a beat. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Hi," I said nervously, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hi," he replied, his voice calm. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hung between us like a heavy fog. "How've you been?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. He shrugged. "Good. Busy. You?" "Good," I lied. "Busy." He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Why did you want to meet Anna?" His question was direct, and I realized I hadn't thought about what I was going to say. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess. I just wanted to see you." Liam studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. "You left," he said finally, his voice quiet. "You made your choice. So why now?" Tears welled up in my eyes, and I looked away. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," I whispered. "About us." Liam's expression didn't change when I said the words. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady, unreadable. "Why now?" he asked again, his voice quieter this time. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I thought leaving was the right thing to do. I thought I needed something more, something bigger. But I was wrong, Liam. I see that now." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared down at his coffee, his fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "Do you know how hard it was to watch you go?" he asked finally, his voice thick with emotion. "To see you walk away like what we had didn't matter?" His words cut deeper than I expected, and I felt a fresh wave of guilt crash over me. "It did matter," I said quickly. "It still does. I didn't know how to tell you what I was feeling back then. I didn't know how to ask for more." "More of what?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. "More excitement? More adventure? More of something I couldn't give you?" I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought I wanted this big, glamorous life. But now, all I can think about is what I gave up, what I lost when I left you." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't just leave me, Anna. You left everything we built together. And I had to pick up the pieces on my own." "I know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "And I hate myself for it. I don't expect you to forgive me, Liam. I needed you to know that I've never stopped thinking about you. That I've never stopped missing you." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he looked up, his eyes softening just a fraction. "What do you want from me, Anna?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know," I said again, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I don't even know if it's fair for me to want anything. But I needed to see you. To tell you that I'm sorry. And that I miss you." Liam didn't respond, and I didn't push him. We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he stood up, sliding his chair back. "I need time," he said simply. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Take all the time you need." He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod before walking out of the cafe, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I replayed our conversation over and over in my head, analyzing every word, every look, every moment of silence. I knew I'd done what I needed to do. Opened the door, however small, for Liam to decide what he wanted. But the waiting was agony. I didn't hear from him for weeks. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap, only to sink again when I realized it wasn't him. I told myself to be patient, to give him the space he deserved. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to lose hope. One evening, just as I was starting to convince myself that Liam had moved on for good, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and my heart stopped. It was a text from Liam. "Can we talk?" I stared at the words, my hands trembling. It took me a few seconds to compose myself before typing back. "Yes." "When and where?" We met at a park this time, one we used to visit on Sunday mornings with coffee and pastries. Seeing him sitting on one of the benches brought back a flood of memories, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself before walking over. "Hi," I said softly as I sat down beside him. "Hi," he replied, his voice just as soft. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Liam turned to me, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About how you left because you thought you needed something more." I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "I'm not going to lie, Anna. What you did hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible. And part of me is still angry that you didn't trust me enough to talk to me before it got to that point." I swallowed hard, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know," I whispered, "and you have every right to feel that way. But," he continued, his voice softening, "I've also been thinking about what we had, about all the good things. And I can't deny that I miss you too." My breath caught in my throat, and I looked at him, hope flickering to life. "You do." He nodded, his gaze steady. "But I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened, Anna. And I need to know that if we try again, it's because you're all in. Not because you're lonely or nostalgic, but because you really want this." "I do," I said quickly, the words tumbling out of me. "I want this, Liam. I want you. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing my words. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's take it slow. One step at a time." As we walked out of the park together, side by side, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Taking it slow was easier said than done. Liam and I agreed to start with something simple: dinner. Neutral ground, no pressure, just two people trying to reconnect. But even as I walked into the restaurant that evening, my heart was racing. He was already there, seated at a corner table with a glass of water in front of him. When he saw me, he smiled, a small, tentative smile that made my chest ache. "Hi," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Hi," he replied, his voice calm but guarded. For the first half hour, our conversation stayed firmly in safe territory: work, hobbies, the weather. It was polite, almost painfully so, and I found myself missing the easy rhythm we used to have. But then, over dessert, Liam surprised me. "Do you remember that time we got caught in the rain on the way back from the farmer's market?" he asked, a small smile playing at his lips. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "Yeah," I said, laughing softly. "We were soaked by the time we got home. And you tried to convince me that tea and a blanket were just as good as an umbrella," he said, his smile widening. "It worked, didn't it?" I teased, feeling a flicker of the old warmth between us. He nodded, his gaze softening. "Yeah, it did." For the first time that night, it felt like we were really talking, not as two people trying to navigate the aftermath of a breakup, but as the Anna and Liam we used to be. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. We started seeing each other more regularly, but always in small, controlled doses, a coffee here, a walk there. Slowly, the walls between us began to come down. But there were still moments when the weight of everything we'd been through pressed down on us. One evening, as we walked along the river, Liam suddenly stopped. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't left?" he asked, his voice quiet. "All the time," I admitted, my chest tightening. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I regret hurting you," I said finally. "I regret walking away, without giving us a chance to fix things. But I don't regret what I learned from it. It showed me how much I need you in my life, Liam. How much I love you." For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then he nodded, his eyes softening. "I just needed to hear that," he said. As the weeks turned into months, our tentative steps grew bolder. Liam invited me to his place for dinner, a quiet evening that felt like a milestone. His apartment was different from the one we'd shared, but it still had the same warmth: plants on the windowsills, books stacked haphazardly on shelves, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. We cooked together, laughing as we stumbled through a new recipe. For a moment, it felt like we'd gone back in time, to a version of us untouched by the pain and mistakes. After dinner, we sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking about everything and nothing. I found myself stealing glances at him, marveling at how familiar and yet new he felt. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching me off guard. "You," I said simply. He smiled, setting his glass down. "I'm glad you reached out, Anna. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "Neither did I admitted. "But I'm so glad I did." Despite the progress we were making, not everything was easy. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced, when the weight of what I'd done felt like too much to bear. One evening, after a particularly hard day, Liam turned to me and said, "Do you ever worry that we'll never really get past this? That no matter how hard we try, it'll always be there?" "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I think love is about choosing to keep trying, even when it's hard. And I choose you, Liam. Every time." His eyes softened, and he reached out to take my hand. "I choose you too," he said quietly. The first time Liam kissed me again, it felt like coming home. We were standing in his kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when he suddenly turned to me, his gaze intense. Before I could say anything, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters. But as I kissed him back, the hesitation melted away, replaced by something deeper, something that felt like hope. When we finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "I've missed you," he whispered. "I've missed you too," I replied, tears streaming down my face. From that moment on, something shifted between us. We weren't just two people trying to rebuild what we'd lost. We were two people creating something new. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of doubt, of fear, of wondering if we were doing the right thing. But we faced those moments together, leaning on each other in a way we hadn't before. One day, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Liam turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever stop being afraid of losing this again?" I smiled, reaching for his hand. "Maybe not," I said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it just means we know how much it matters." He nodded, his gaze steady. "It does matter," he said. "You matter." Every step forward with Liam felt like walking on a tightrope. We were learning how to trust each other again, but the process was slow and fragile. And though we'd grown closer, there were moments when the past crept back in, threatening to pull us under. One evening, as we were curled up on his couch watching a movie, Liam paused the screen and turned to me. "Do you ever worry," he began, his voice tentative, "that I'll never look at you the same way again?" His words caught me off guard. I sat up, searching his face for clues to what he was really asking. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I don't want that, Liam. I want us to be better than we were." He nodded, but his eyes held a shadow of doubt. "It's hard, you know?" "I know," I said softly, reaching for his hand. "But I'm not going anywhere this time. No matter how hard it gets, I'm here. With you." Liam looked down at our intertwined fingers, his thumb brushing against my skin. "I believe you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Believing wasn't the same as forgetting. There were still times when I could see the pain in Liam's eyes, when a small comment or a passing memory brought everything rushing back. But instead of avoiding those moments, we faced them head-on. One day, as we sat in the park, Liam turned to me and said, "Can I ask you something? About why you left?" I nodded, my chest tightening. "Was it just boredom?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "It wasn't boredom. It was fear." "Fear of what?" "Of settling," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Of waking up one day and realizing I'd missed out on something bigger. I thought leaving would make me happier, but all it did was show me how wrong I was." Liam was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I wish you'd told me that back then." "I wish I had too," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Liam, for everything." He reached out, placing a hand on mine. "We can't change the past," he said. but we can decide what happens next. Deciding what happened next meant facing the hardest truths about ourselves. We started going to couples therapy, something I'd suggested and Liam had reluctantly agreed to. At first, it was awkward, sitting in a room with a stranger and airing our deepest fears and regrets. But over time, those sessions became a lifeline. I felt abandoned, Liam admitted one day, his voice raw. Like I wasn't enough for you. Like I'd never be enough. You were always enough, I said, tears streaming down my face. You were more than enough. I just couldn't see it then. The therapist nodded, her gaze kind but firm. It sounds like both of you are struggling to communicate your needs. The good news is you're here now, and that's a huge step forward. Outside of therapy, Liam and I found ourselves rediscovering the small joys that had once defined our relationship. We went on long walks, cooked dinner together, and spent lazy Sunday mornings reading on the couch. One evening, as we sat on his balcony watching the city lights, Liam turned to me and said, "You know, I think we're doing okay." I smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Yeah, I think we are." But not every day was easy. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Liam asked, "Do you ever think about him?" I froze, my hands gripping the dish towel. "Who?" "Alex," he said, his tone even but his eyes searching mine. "No," I said firmly. "I don't." Liam nodded, but I could see the doubt flickering behind his eyes. "I don't," I repeated, setting the towel down and turning to face him. "Because he wasn't you, Liam. He never could have been. And that's why it didn't work. I see that now." Liam studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," he said quietly. As the months went by, the cracks in our relationship began to heal, slowly but surely. We weren't the same people we'd been before, and we both knew that. But we were learning to love the new versions of ourselves, the versions that had been tested, broken, and rebuilt. One day, as we walked hand in hand through the park, Liam stopped suddenly and turned to me. "I want you to move back in," he said, his voice steady. My heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I think we're ready." Moving back in with Liam was a bittersweet experience. The apartment looked different from the one we'd shared before. New furniture, new decorations, but it still felt like home. As I unpacked my things, Liam stood in the doorway, watching me with a small smile. "What?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just happy you're here." "I'm happy too," I said softly. That night, as we lay in bed, Liam reached for my hand. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know I want you in it." Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed his hand. "Me too," I said. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. Moving back in with Liam wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of something new. The first few weeks felt like a cautious dance, both of us testing the waters, relearning the rhythms of living together. There were moments of joy, shared meals, late-night conversations, stolen kisses, but also moments of doubt. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Liam suddenly reached for the remote and paused the screen. "Do you ever wonder if we're just setting ourselves up to fail again?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't think so," I said carefully. "But I know it's not going to be easy. We're going to have bad days, Liam. But I think we're stronger now. And I think we can handle them together." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I want to believe that," he said. "Then let's make it true," I replied, reaching for his hand. One of the biggest challenges was learning how to trust each other again. For Liam, it meant letting go of the fear that I might leave again. For me, it meant proving to him and to myself that I was here to stay. We leaned on the tools we'd learned in therapy, practicing open communication and setting boundaries. It wasn't always perfect. Sometimes we argued, sometimes old insecurities bubbled to the surface. But we were learning to navigate those moments with patience and understanding. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation about the past, Liam turned to me and said, "I don't want us to keep looking backward, Anna. I want us to look forward." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Me too, I said. Looking forward meant rebuilding the life we'd once dreamed of. We started making plans again, small ones at first, like weekend trips to the countryside or trying new restaurants in the city. Then, as our confidence grew, we began talking about bigger things. Buying a house, traveling abroad, maybe even starting a family someday. But it wasn't just about the plans. It was about the everyday moments. The way Liam would smile at me across the dinner table, the quiet mornings we spent sipping coffee together, the way he'd pull me into his arms at the end of a long day. Those moments reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place, and why I'd fight to keep us together. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Liam surprised me with a question I hadn't expected. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't left?" he asked. "All the time," I admitted. "But I think it had to happen, Liam. As much as I hate what I put you through, I think it showed me how much you mean to me. How much we mean to each other." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I think you're right," he said. "It wasn't easy, but maybe we needed to go through it to get here." Here wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The first time Liam told me he loved me after everything we'd been through, it felt different. Not because the words had changed, but because we had. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I was standing in the kitchen, making coffee, when Liam walked up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "I love you," he said simply, his voice steady. I froze, my heart pounding. "I love you too," I whispered, turning to face him. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I just wanted you to know." From that moment on, it felt like we'd crossed a threshold. The doubts and fears didn't disappear overnight, but they became easier to face together. We stopped thinking of our relationship as something to fix and started thinking of it as something to build. One day, as we walked through the park hand in hand, Liam turned to me with a mischievous smile. "What?" I asked, laughing. "I was just thinking," he said. "This feels like a second chance, doesn't it?" "It does," I said, squeezing his hand. "And I'm not going to waste it," he said firmly. "Neither am I replied. Our story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated, filled with mistakes and regrets. But it was also filled with love, resilience, and the determination to fight for what mattered most. We weren't the same people we'd been when we first fell in love, and maybe that was a good thing. Because this time, we were stronger. This time, we knew what we had to lose. And this time, we wouldn't let it go.